There's lots going on in Ireland, lots going on everywhere. Let's get to it. First, we got to start with Chrystia Freeland. She went on all the Sunday shows, and Vasi Kopoulos apparently owned her. And the first 2 minutes, I mean, the whole 4 minutes is pretty entertaining as far as these things go. Chrystia Freeland is bad at the Liberal tap dance. Her strategy is to talk so long that she bores you to tears and you forget what it is that you actually asked her. So she talks and talks and talks and talks. And by the third minute of her response, where she's definitely going to get to your question, just give me a second, you forget what the heck your question even was. So it's very interesting. Here's Vasi Kopoulos and Chrystia Freeland fencing. Here we go.
Lifting the GST on purpose-built rental alone is a game changer.
But you promised that almost 7 years ago,
and now it is in place, and it is making a real difference. The other measure that
when you first promised it, though, and did your government's inability to see the crisis as it was developing, lead to less effective impacts on what you're doing?
I just disagree. Many Canadians want to buy a home.
I just disagree. I can't stand the music in the background. It makes it really hard to listen to. But if you are interested, you can watch the whole 4 minutes. Once you get used to it, it's fine. But I find it intrusive, so I'm not going to play it for you guys. Contrarian says Freeland getting owned by Vasi for 4 minutes. Vasi called Twitchy out several times on the lies of the Liberal government. Freeland would not answer any of the questions. She would just keep regurgitating rubbish. This one doesn't have an audio track in the background, and this is a good example of exactly what was happening in the other interview. The other interview just had a lot of background noise. We'll go with this one for a minute. This is not what you would want an elected leader, how you would want them to answer questions. Unfortunately for Canada, this is all we get. Here we go.
Take from that you would characterize, for example, this year's deficit at $40 billion, or the next 2 years, which are about $10 to $12 billion higher than anticipated at budget, as modest? And can you understand how Canadians might greet that with some skepticism, given your government's track record hasn't always been restrained? And I'll provide you with a few examples and offer you the opportunity to respond. $50 million on an app, ArriveCan, that never worked. The federal public services employment growth rate is 3 times greater than the population growth rate. Spending on contracting has increased by more than a third since just 2017.
Yeah. Truly, thank you for the question, because
Chrystia Freeland's whole strategy is to talk you bored to tears, I just put down the main points of the question. Do you think Canadians would find it believable that you're behaving in a fiscally restrained way, considering Arrive scam and all of the other fiscal disasters that Vasi listed there, and considering the $40 billion deficit, which is not modest, but which Chrystia Freeland says is modest, and the $12 billion more than estimated in the fiscal update? That doesn't look modest either, right? Like if you say it's we're going to top out at, whatever it is, 40 billion, and you come out at 52, that's not good, right? Like that's your prediction was wrong, and not on the I predicted 40 and we went 28. No, right? Like it was the other way. That's not modest. That's the opposite of modest. $12 billion higher than estimated. That's not modest. Anyway, here's Chrystia Freeland not answering any of the questions. I'll leave this notepad up for a little while here, and I don't know if you can read it. Maybe you can. I tried to increase the font size and it just didn't work, and I didn't care enough to look into it too much. Here we go.
I believe from all the conversations I have across the country that Canadians understand now is a time we need to invest. I find people are particularly focused on investments in housing. I find certainly parents and grandparents very focused on childcare. I think,
but that's different than the examples I laid out with respect.
I'm gonna get to those. I promise. People are really aware that we need to invest in the industrial transformation of our country, and I think people really want to know that we're doing it in a fiscally responsible way. I think that's kind of the base setting of Canadians, and I agree with that. And I think it can be hard for people to judge, is it fiscally responsible or isn't it? We're here in Ottawa. I think the House of Commons is behind us. There are lots of partisan talking points flying around. And so what I would say, to you, but even more to people listening to us and watching us, I get that you don't want me to grade my own homework. And I get that hearing me say government is fiscally responsible, you want some proof points. So I'll give you 2 quick proof points. The first one is Canada's debt and Canada's deficit right now, today, are the lowest in the G7. That is significant. Second thing, and this speaks to, I don't believe we should grade our own homework. I don't expect you to want us to grade our own homework. There is someone out there whose job it is to give us a grade, and that is quite literally the ratings agencies. And the grade that the ratings agencies are giving Canada right now, today, is the highest grade possible.
But the interest rates are going up, and the debt service costs are going up, and we don't have extra money, and we're making stupid fiscal decisions. And when she talks about not grading your own homework, it's a stacked deck. The monetary system is an insider game, almost I don't know if it's a Ponzi scheme necessarily, but it's all a coordinated game, right? And if you're on side, they're going to love you, right? If you're doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing, like sending all the money to Ukraine and all of that, then they're going to love you. I don't know that her saying we're being fiscally responsible while you go to the grocery store. And so I like chocolate cereal. That's no secret. And cereal boxes at the grocery store that I go to were 3 for $10. And then they changed them. And that's a loss leader. I know that those are costing more, but if you buy in bulk, then that's roughly what that costs, right? So what they did was they made it $5 a box, and they made, well, $4.97. And you know, I didn't buy 3 boxes that day. And the next week it was back down to 3 for $10. And it's interesting to me that the leadership, who makes enough money to not notice the cost of cereal maybe, is out of touch enough to say the economy is good. The rating agencies say Canada is good. Don't listen to people who criticize the debt service cost, blah, 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 blah. All of these people who are smart in finance. And again, those smart in finance people, I'm pretty sure were around during the 2008 crash and orchestrated the next phase of what we're living through now. So those people I don't necessarily trust anyway, but they're so out of touch that they can tell us the economy is great. But when you go to a grocery store, you know the truth, right? And so it's interesting. So I find Chrystia Freeland not believable. That's maybe an understatement. Here's Chrystia Freeland talking about investing in refugees and asylum seekers, and she's talking about investing billions with a B. This is a little while ago. I've shown this video before. It's not very long. She's with Mayor Olivia Chow in Toronto talking about this, but Kirk makes a couple of good points here. He says, Chrystia Freeland, the federal government is investing $4.2 billion in refugees and asylum seekers. Here she is saying it.
The federal government this year is investing more than $4.2 billion in dollars in supporting refugees and asylum seekers.
Wild. And Kirk says, what? That's more than the budget was for the grocery rebate and is a 1-month payment for our debt services charge. They also had to borrow the $4.2 billion, so it's plus interest. We essentially have Canadian refugees from liberal policies in our streets. Enough is enough with these spit-in-the-face policies. Yeah, people are pretty upset. Here's Rick. He says, the pattern is disturbingly clear. Justin Trudeau is using billions of your dollars to subsidize foreign workers. We've called for an emergency meeting. We will not sweep this under the rug. So the Liberal government is using $4.2 billion to directly fund refugees and asylum seekers in Canada. But also it's using job creation as an excuse to give foreign companies billions of dollars and then not even hire Canadian workers. They bring in foreign workers to staff the plant, which seems, I don't know, again, wrong. If the taxpayer is funding it, we're not allowed to profit and we're not allowed to have any kind of jobs from it. It seems, or of the 2,400 jobs, right, you get less 1,600. So not great. Rick says, well, this is Rick's letter, and Rick is an MP. He is Member of Parliament for South Shore St. Margaret's. And this is just an example of the current attack being waged by the Conservatives about these things. But this is from MP Kelly McCauley. And he says, Dear Chair, the Trudeau government is using billions in taxpayer money to subsidize foreign workers. On Friday, we learned that Northvolt is bringing in hundreds of foreign workers for their manufacturing facility in Saint-Basile-le-Grand and McMasterville, Quebec. Taxpayers have provided the Northvolt facility with $7 billion in total investments. Earlier this week, we learned that the Stellantis LG manufacturing facility in Windsor, Ontario is bringing in foreign workers as well. Stellantis LG received $15 billion in taxpayer money from Canadians just days ago. Trudeau's Minister for Employment said there's one temporary foreign worker that's been approved for this project. One application has been approved, and the Minister of Industry stated you'll have a few people, very few people, selected people, who need to come to transfer technology. We have now learned that the company is bringing in 900 foreign workers, and the Windsor police chief said the city is preparing for 1,600 foreign workers to be brought in. The pattern is disturbingly clear. The Prime Minister is paying billions for foreign replacement workers instead of guaranteeing jobs for Canadians. Canadians have the right to know if there are any job guarantees for Canadian workers in the contracts signed between the government and the various EV battery manufacturing companies. The only way to do this is to fully release all the contracts. Given this latest insult to Canadian taxpayers and workers by the Prime Minister, it's mandatory for the government to release the contracts. Pursuant to Standing Order 1064, we, the undersigned members, are calling an emergency meeting to pass a motion calling on the government to release the contracts so Canadians can see if there are any protections for Canadian jobs. Well, the answer to that is no, obviously. I think absolutely not. Here's Michael Barrett, and he is doing this, articulating the same argument. Here is this video. This is from his Twitter account.
The Prime Minister spending billions of taxpayer dollars on foreign workers to fill jobs at a manufacturing plant in Ontario. He's not worth the cost, and his NDP Liberal government can't keep their story straight. The minister from Edmonton says it's just going to be one. This minister here said it's going to be a few. The hiring firm says it's going to be 900. The Windsor police say it's 1,600 workers from overseas to fill this plant in southern Ontario. Will they release the contract so Canadians can find out how many workers from overseas $15 billion buys?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Speaker, instead of talking the Canadian economy down, they should celebrate that someone is investing $3.4 billion of their money, Mr. Speaker, to build a plant in Windsor. But let me say what an expert says about the Conservative, Mr. Speaker. Here's what Brennan Sweeney of the Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing had to say about them. I think those making this noise are hypocritical. What they're saying is erroneous and factually incorrect. They don't have the faintest knowledge of the industry, Mr. Speaker. That's what experts are saying about the Conservative. We're going to continue to fight for Canadian workers.
You know what's weird? Hold on. I'll let Michael Barrett say his piece.
The Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Vito Lakes.
I guess it's a question of who Canadians want to believe, the NDP Liberal cover-up coalition or the Windsor police, who say it's 1,600 replacement workers coming from overseas to work at this plant in southern Ontario. $15 billion taxpayer dollars to fund workers from foreign soil. After 8 years, it's clear that this NDP Liberal Prime Minister simply isn't worth the cost. So, will the minister put his disinformation and distraction aside and finally release the contracts so Canadians can get the truth about how many replacement workers Canadians get for $15 billion?
They don't get the answer. But what I think is strange is that the Liberals are very excited about importing technology from other places, and that's fine. Great if we can import the technology to make our whatever extraction technique more efficient, or refining technique more efficient, or in the energy world, if there's a new battery that's going to work and we want to use it, then fine. But it seems really strange to spend so much money on batteries, and it seems like an unproven technology at this point in time, that the more you learn about it, the more obvious it is that it's not going to work. It seems strange that we didn't at all develop our own technology. We're an energy powerhouse in Canada. And instead of developing our own technology, our own expertise, our own everything, we are importing it and saying, we have to invest in all of this and we have to have technology exchange because we don't understand how to make it work. That's not great. That's not a good place to be, in my opinion, right? That's not so good. And we used to not be like that. We used to be leaders in the energy industry because we had all the energy and we were like, oh yeah, we've seen that before. We know how to do that with oil wells and things like that. So it's not great that we are, and again, it's just bad policy. We're being hamstrung by an ideologically driven federal government. So, but it's not good for Canada. The less oil and the less product we sell to foreign countries, et cetera, then the less money one of our biggest money makers in the country makes. And I mean, then our GDP falls, right? Gross domestic product and all that falls, and our quality of life falls, and that's not good, right? So we need to make sure that we are able to extract our products and get them to market, right? And that's true of grain, that's true of harvest, that's true of oil, right? LNG and other stuff, right? And we should have a pipeline from coast to coast right now, and like under the ocean to Newfoundland, everywhere to like east to west, Maritimes included, the whole shebang. Okay, CP24 is reporting number of people using Ontario food banks rose 38% last year. I wonder how many of that 38% rise is foreign nationals, people who didn't grow up in Canada and just arrived in Canada randomly because they heard, there's lots of good things in Canada. There's lots of places that hand out free food. I'm not sure, but the food bank is being utilized. And the other part of that, though, is there are YouTube videos by foreign students saying, "Hey, did you guys know that you could just go to the food bank and do your shopping, and then whatever you don't buy at the food bank or don't get at the food bank, you can just go pick up at the grocery store, and you've halved your grocery bill." Right there, you go. Tips for living in Canada to make it not so expensive. But that's not what the food bank's for. Oh, I have a quick show note before we get into free speech and speech generally. The emails on Canada Poly stopped working about the 27th, and I only realized 2 days ago. I fixed it yesterday, but it might take 7 days to get off the blacklist. So if you've tried to reset a password or if you've tried to gain access, I think there's been a purchase and I didn't realize that the emails weren't being sent. So if you've purchased Canada Poly subscription on CanadaPoly.com and you didn't get an email from the website and you're wondering what the heck, apologies. That's my bad, my fault. And email me directly and I will get you sorted out. And the website will be back to properly sending emails that make it to your inbox and don't get bounced back within the next week. Usually, as soon as the fix is in place, you get removed from the blacklist. But I don't know that it's been checked by the blacklist. So they said allow up to 7 days before it gets automatically removed. So fingers crossed that it'll be quick to get removed from that blacklist. And it affects people using live email addresses like Microsoft, and it affects some Gmail, but not all Gmail. So again, apology. It's a lot of people, so apologize. I apologize that I did not realize that it was happening. And I know it now, and it is fixed. Okay. Moving on. Let's talk about free speech. Lyndon Wood, he's a Brit, and he says, that's why I got banned here for 11 months. They spied on me and got me censored. So the Daily Mail is reporting on the 25th. Ministers accused of a cover-up as it revealed shadowy army unit did spy on British critics of COVID lockdown policies. Well, I think everybody knew that the governments were spying on people through COVID and all of that. And I'm not trying to minimize. We just knew that it was happening without a doubt, and we knew it was bad, and nobody seemed able to do anything about it because they made fun of people who brought it up as conspiracy theorists, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very effective way to not have to actually honestly deal with criticism, or if you're breaking the law, if you're doing something that goes against the basic rights of whatever, you just say, "Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. That's crazy." And then you continue breaking the law. Totally scot-free. And it seems like everybody says, "Well, there's an emergency, so that's okay." Wild stuff. Holly Doan says, "You were dragged into an administrator's office for writing an op-ed. What happened?" So this person was writing op-eds about Sir John A. Macdonald, talking about how history is a muddy subject and it's much more complex than what you want to, or what you believe it to be. And here's the anecdote that I teased, but there's a whole Substack that talks about this, how fraud it is writing about Canadian history and former prime ministers and the creation of the country, et cetera, et cetera. People have an idea in their heads, and the idea in their head about what Canada is very different than what Canada actually is. Anyway, here it is. "You were dragged into administrator's office for writing an op-ed. What happened?" And he says, "I was writing about Sir John A. Macdonald and the whole statue issue and his handling of Indigenous issues as Prime Minister. I guess I wasn't supposed to do anything other than criticize John A. Macdonald, but I tried to point out that history is a very complicated topic. People today want to see it as black and white. And so, yeah, they're the complicated grays. I mean, even, and we've talked about this many times, but with the Israel-Palestine-Hamas thing, if you say we shouldn't fund any side of it and I'm on Team Canada, then people get mad, man. And it's a weird thing. That's anti-Semitic. That sure is. Jennifer says, still nothing in the mail from the YWCA. So what happened here is she says, I'll be heading to Toronto, the YWCA headquarters at 104 Edward Street on the first floor, and I'll be asking to speak with the CEO and the acting CEO regarding being thrown out of their webinar for asking this question. So she was in a webinar, and she says, I'm a rape survivor, and I'm scared to use the YWCA facilities because men can now identify as women. I've seen a man come into the change room and get naked with his penis out. It frightened my daughter and myself. How can we keep transgenders safe while also keeping women safe? Please help me. I really want to take care of myself physically and mentally. And then they get kicked out of the webinar. So that's not great. And not that I didn't know this happened. I think I heard of it at the time because this didn't just happen recently. It happened November 9th. So there you go. After weeks of voicemails with multiple persons, she sent a registered letter. So it was even before November 9th. But these ideologically driven people are not interested in the reality. They're not interested in the damage they do. They would get rid of this person by calling them transphobic if they could. And I think that they probably will. Like, that's probably going to be in the modus operandi. That's probably going to be how they're going to respond initially, unless this person gets some kind of traction. But if there's not a big kind of media hubbubaloo or online social media hubbaloo or whatever it is, hullabaloo, then nothing's going to change. And I don't know how all of a sudden we got to a place where just saying, a man can't be a woman is something that is not okay, but that's a really crazy place for the West to be, in my opinion. It seems like the Liberals want to deal with made-up problems instead of actual real problems, like this one. Here's the Buck You Will. Says, I want to know what the F environmental racism is, right? The Liberals vow to fight environmental racism in fiscal update. And I just looked up environmental racism. What's environmental racism? And this was from March 6th, 2021. Okay, so environmental racism has been rearing its ugly head for years in Canada. Canada votes to collect data to document environmental racism. Canada will collect data on the impact of sitting a disproportionate number of polluting industries and landfills in areas inhabited by racial minority communities, federal lawmakers voted Wednesday. The bill aims to tackle environmental racism, where Indigenous, Black, and other racial minority communities are exposed to higher levels of dirty air, contaminated water, or other toxins and pollutants. Right. But tent cities are just fine. What? Right? Unacceptable Canadian girl says, wow, this person is talking about taking their dogs on a walk and running into a tent city, which has become ubiquitous in Canada. So environmental racism, having a house near like a landfill or in an industrial area of town, that's racist. But having policies that create an affordability crisis that drives people in a cold country like Canada to live in tents outside, that's just fine and something that we should celebrate? Weird. Here's somebody pointing or showing tent cities in Canada.
And I was just needing some extra good vibes from the world around me. So I decided to take them down to Harris Park in London, Ontario. So this is a park where I used to walk every day in the summertime, or as often as I could for the 5K that it takes me from my house halfway and back. So today I'm walking and I could not believe there is an entire underground tent city, or above ground by the river tent city going on. It is absolutely so sad. I'm going to be taking some videos of it. It was actually really scary. Stay tuned. So hopefully I can record this without anyone seeing me. This is actually terrifying. As I'm walking on the left here, you'll see like there's a whole compound. And on the right, there's another one. actually even built themselves like a walkway.
So if you're not expropriating public land now, you're letting the good spots go. Those people built themselves a walkway. Isn't that wild? Isn't that crazy? We're going to talk about housing in just a minute, but actually we'll just talk about housing now. I've got an update about Carolyn Brajowski and her victory, but that can wait. That can wait. We'll do that at the end of the election. We'll continue talking about housing because right now people are living in tents in parks. That's not good, right? Especially in Canada, it's not good. Here's Sean Fraser. He's the housing minister, and Blacklock's reporter is reporting government should provide a free home to anyone who could not work, says Sean Fraser. He calls it the least taxpayers can do in a country as wealthy as Canada. Has he seen the price of housing these days? Why should I pay for other people's housing? I don't think that's a good idea whatsoever. 980 is reporting, one source with knowledge of the event told Global News that it will introduce the new housing minister to stakeholders and discuss housing task force recommendations. So fundamentally, they're trying to make the argument that building housing is how we're going to get out of this. And so the Ford government is convening a forum as work begins on the next round of housing legislation. They're trying to create laws to enforce having funding to cities and municipalities tied to housing starts and things like that. And the whole idea is ignoring the core of the problem. And nobody in the media, it's like when the Iraq War was starting up and everybody in the media was just, everybody was nodding along saying, yes, we need to invade weapons of mass destruction. Of course, we need to do this. So nobody was using their critical thinking skills. Everybody was just agreeing that this was, the problem is housing. The solution is build more houses. And that's it. We're not even going to talk about the immigration or anything like that. And it's very, very frustrating. And so this is what's going on in Ontario about that. And it's not going to fix any of the problems with housing or with rent. The Ford government will gather housing sector stakeholders in Toronto on Monday to get feedback about upcoming legislation to target the housing crisis, Global News has learned. The 2023 Housing Forum will run all day in Toronto with various roundtable discussions and a short presentation from Housing Minister Paul Calandra. One source with knowledge of the event told Global News it was partly designed to introduce the new minister to stakeholders, including representatives from the development and municipal sectors. Calandra replaced Steve Clark as Ontario's housing minister after the latter resigned at the height of the Greenbelt scandal. The source said the forum would focus on recommendations from Ontario's housing task force. Feedback and discussion from Monday's event will feed into Ontario's next housing supply action plan, legislation that is expected to be tabled sometime in the spring. The Ford government asked the Housing Task Force to write a report with suggestions on how to fix the province's housing issues in early 2022. It made 74 recommendations, including setting the goal of 1.5 million homes. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. We build in Ontario, so like Canada-wide, I think we built 223,000 homes last year, Canada-wide. Pierre Poilievre was using that as a cornerstone of his rhetoric for a while, so that's why that number sticks out. And I think that 276 was like the number in the 70s that was low, and then the new low is 223, but I'm not 100% sure on that, but it's in the 200,000. So saying 1.5 million homes, that's like saying, I'd like a 200% raise, please. And like, if your boss doesn't laugh, you're probably getting fired. Right? If you're serious, 1.5 million homes, a 200% increase, just to put it into perspective, of the houses that we're building now. Let's say it's 250, just to put it in the middle. Like it's not 225, it's not 275, 250. Okay, so a tripling of that is 750,000. That's still half 750,000 homes. So that's half of the 1.5 million homes we need, roughly, which is not going to happen. Not going to happen. Just not going to happen, period. Absolutely not going to happen. So these idiots, part of our recommendations is, grow 9 feet taller. Good job. Great. Love your recommendations. More recommendations include a promise the Progressive Conservative Party made as part of its election platform and has become a central policy for its second term. 1.5 million homes in what timeline? 25 years? Idiots. according to the government's website. And I was talking about a single year, by the way. And if they're talking about a single year, it's pie in the sky ridiculousness. And I guess clearly they're not, over a term or over 10 terms or something like that. According to the government's website, 23 of the 74 recommendations have been completed and 14 are underway, an agenda for the housing forum. So it's interesting as well. They use this little checklist thing. Doesn't matter. There are important things to do and not important things to do, right? And if you have a list of 74 things to do and you're like, oh yeah, I could do all these, I could do a whole bunch of these things super quick. But if the important, difficult things don't get done, then it doesn't matter, right? Like, oh yeah, well, I did everything but the really hard, important stuff. Yeah, well, that's kind of the meat of it. That's kind of the core of it, you know? So I think that fundamentally, it's not a plan. And even if you've got recommendations to fix the problem, if you avoid discussing the actual problem, you're not going to solve it. And that's exactly what's going on in Ontario right now with housing across Canada, really. Dr. Mike Moffat says Canadian government, federal and provincial, decided to scale up international student and temporary foreign worker programs without scaling up the housing programs. This forces international students and temporary foreign workers into precarious housing situations and sets them up for exploitation. Oh, I hear that's environmental racism, but they should just move into a tent city. Fixed, right? It's lovely. They live in nature. They can build themselves a little walkway, you know, like whatever, man. Here's an interesting question and answer period on the streets of Dublin. And you know already, as soon as you know the question, you will know the answer. What is the most popular baby name she gives a city. She says in Galway or Gal blah blah. And these guys are saying Patrick, David, Richard. And then they find out the name and they say, oh, well, I didn't expect that. And they don't want to be labeled Islamophobic. Here we go.
Peter? No?
Patrick? I don't know. No, maybe that's like the most Irish name. Most popular? I don't know. Dave, maybe?
Not a clue. Not a clue. I'm guessing it was not a traditional Irish name. Richard.
It was not Richard.
Was it? Oh, fuck. Didn't see that coming. It wasn't Richard.
No, would you like to know what it was?
Yeah.
Right, I'll let you try and answer first.
I'd say Jack.
I'd say Mohammed.
You're correct.
What? Right.
According to the CSO in 2022, the most popular boy's name in Galway was Mohammed.
Oh, yeah. I read that somewhere, yeah.
She's desperate not to be called Islamophobic. Ooh, right, I read that somewhere. Here is a typical British family enjoying Christmas according to Tesco. Tesco's like the Walmart of it, like a Marks and Spencer's competitor, Walmart competitor, kind of the same thing. They don't have Walmart, they have Safeway. But anyway, regardless, a typical British family enjoying Christmas according to Tesco, right? So obviously the British family is very, very black. And in England, traditionally, black families have not made up the majority demographic. So that's why that's funny. Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful